Have you ever been with someone who pulls away the closer you get? The more love you give, the more they retreat into themselves. It's frustrating, right? You feel like you're chasing a shadow. But what if I told you that chasing is exactly the problem? Avoidants aren't running from you. They're running from their own fears. They're terrified of being vulnerable, of being truly seen. And the harder you push, the higher their walls go. But here's the truth: those walls crumble when you stop pushing. When you create safety, when you see them without forcing them, everything shifts. Understanding this truth doesn't just change the game. It transforms relationships. Have you ever noticed how people with avoidant personalities seem invincible? They hold themselves back from connection, build walls around their hearts, and keep their distance from anyone who tries to get too close. They appear calm, detached, and in control. But what you might not realize is that this armor isn't made of steel. It's made of fear. Underneath that carefully controlled exterior is someone deeply afraid of being vulnerable. Someone who's afraid of what might happen if they let you in. You see, avoidants don't push people away because they don't care. They push people away because they care too much. And they're terrified of what might happen if they allow themselves to truly connect. They fear the messiness of intimacy, the pain of rejection, and the weight of being truly seen. So they create distance. They put up walls. They act like they don't need anyone. And they convince themselves and everyone else that they're fine on their own. But here's the truth: those walls crumble when they encounter genuine connection. Because no matter how high someone builds a wall, it's never strong enough to withstand the quiet power of authenticity. When you show up for someone with an avoidant personality with calmness, patience, and consistency, not trying to force them to open up, not trying to fix them, but simply being there, it does something extraordinary. It creates safety. And safety is the one thing the avoidant personality has been missing all along. Avoidants are drawn to connection just like everyone else. They want it. They need it. But they're so afraid of it that they sabotage it before it can even begin. The moment they sense someone trying to get in, their walls go up higher. But the moment someone stops trying to force their way in, when someone simply sees them, without pressure or expectation, the avoidant feels something they haven't felt in a long time: safe. And when someone feels safe, their defenses begin to crumble. It doesn't happen in an instant, and it's not always dramatic. It's a slow, subtle shift. The avoidant person starts to lean in just a little. They start to open up just a crack, and once that crack appears, the light of connection begins to shine through. It's in that moment, that tiny shift, that the walls begin to fall. The avoidant's greatest fear is being vulnerable and rejected. But when they realize they can be vulnerable and accepted, their entire world changes. That's the truth most people miss. You can't break down an avoidance walls by force. You can't demand connection from someone who's terrified of it. You can't push and prod and expect them to open up, but you can invite them. You can create an environment where they feel safe enough to come forward on their own terms. And when they do, when they realize they're not being judged, not being pressured, not being chased, their defenses collapse under the weight of that truth. They crumble in the best possible way because they realize that true connection isn't something to fear, it's something to embrace. So the next time you're faced with someone who seems avoidant, someone who pulls away, when you try to get close, remember this: their walls are built from fear, not indifference. And those walls aren't permanent. They can crumble, but only when you stop trying to tear them down and start offering them the one thing they need most: real, honest, patient connection. That's the secret. And once you understand it, you'll see avoidance not as distant or detached, but as people longing for connection, just waiting for the safety to let it happen. Too often, when we encounter someone with an avoidant personality, our first instinct is to try to fix them. We think if we can just show them how much we care, if we can love them enough, if we can convince them they don't need to be afraid, then they'll finally let down their guard and let us in. But this approach is flawed. It's not about fixing them. It's about understanding the fear that drives their behavior. Avoidant personalities aren't broken, they're scared. And when we approach them with an attitude of fixing, it only reinforces their fear. Because what they hear, even if we don't say it out loud, is, "You're not enough the way you are. You need to change to be loved." That message only makes them retreat further. their walls get higher, their defenses grow stronger, and we're left feeling frustrated, wondering why our efforts to help seem to push them away. But when we shift our perspective from fixing to understanding, everything changes. We begin to see that avoidant behaviors are not choices. They're survival strategies. These individuals learned somewhere along the way that vulnerability was dangerous. Maybe they were hurt, rejected, or abandoned in the past. Maybe they were taught explicitly or implicitly that emotions were weaknesses to be hidden or suppressed. Over time, they internalized the belief that the safest way to navigate relationships was to keep their distance, to stay in control, and to never let anyone get too close. When you understand this, it becomes clear that your job is not to fix them. It's to meet them where they are. It's to recognize the fear behind the distance. It's to understand that the walls they've built aren't there to hurt you. They're there to protect themselves from the possibility of being hurt. And the more you try to scale those walls, the more they'll reinforce them. But if you approach with patience, compassion, and consistency, you send a different message. I see you. I accept you. You don't need to change to be worthy of love. This doesn't mean tolerating disrespect or unhealthy behavior. Boundaries are essential. But it does mean approaching the relationship with empathy rather than frustration. It means listening instead of lecturing. It means offering presence instead of pressure. And it means accepting that the avoidance journey to trust and connection will be slow and cautious, because that's what safety looks like to them. There's a quiet power in this approach. When you stop trying to fix them and start simply understanding them, you create a space where they can begin to feel safe. Safe enough to lower their defenses, even if just a little. Safe enough to test the waters of vulnerability without fearing immediate rejection. Safe enough to consider the possibility that connection might not be as dangerous as they once believed. And here's the paradox: the moment they feel safe, they begin to change. Not because you push them, but because they feel seen, heard, and accepted. They begin to take small risks, to open up, to lean in, to share more of themselves. And those small steps, those cracks in the armor, are what ultimately lead to deeper connection. So if you're struggling with someone who seems avoidant, let go of the urge to fix them. Instead, choose to understand. Choose to stand steady in the face of their fear. Choose to offer them the one thing they're too afraid to ask for: unconditional presence. Not, I'll love you if you change, but I'm here and I see you. It's that quiet, unwavering presence that speaks louder than any words or grand gestures ever could. And it's in that space of safety and understanding that true transformation happens. Control. It's the armor that avoidant personalities wear every single day. It's how they shield themselves from the unpredictability of emotions, from the messiness of connection, from the possibility of being hurt. Control gives them the illusion of safety, the comfort of believing they can manage their world without needing anyone else. But here's the truth: they may not even realize themselves. No amount of control can protect them from the ache of isolation. And no amount of control can replace the deep human need for connection. People with avoidant tendencies often believe that if they can just control their feelings, control the narrative, control the level of closeness, then they'll be safe. They tell themselves it's easier to stay detached, to avoid the chaos of intimacy, to keep relationships on their terms. But what they're really doing is armoring up against the very thing that has the power to heal them: connection. The armor may keep others out, but it also keeps love, support, and understanding from getting in. This armor of control shows up in so many subtle ways. It's the person who always keeps things surface level, never letting the conversation drift into personal territory. It's the one who seems aloof or dismissive, who shrugs off affection or avoids emotional conversations. It's the partner who creates distance after a moment of closeness, or the friend who disappears when things get too intense. These behaviors aren't signs of not caring, they're signs of fear. Fear of losing control, fear of being exposed, fear of being hurt. And yet, despite all that effort to stay in control, there's one thing that can quietly, gently begin to dismantle that armor: genuine connection. Not forced connection, not dramatic declarations of love or affection, but simple, steady, authentic connection. The kind where you show up consistently, where you listen without judgment, where you allow them to be who they are without trying to change them. The kind where your presence says, I see you, and I'm not going anywhere. This kind of connection doesn't feel threatening. It doesn't feel like a challenge to their independence or a disruption to their carefully constructed world. It feels safe, and safety is what their armor was trying to create all along when they experience real connection. When someone meets them with calmness, understanding, and patience, it sends a powerful message. You don't have to control everything to be safe. You're safe just as you are. And here's the paradox. The very control they've clung to so tightly begins to feel unnecessary. Not because someone forced them to give it up, but because connection has given them something better. Control may provide temporary safety, but connection offers lasting security. Connection tells them they're not alone, that they're understood, that they're valued not for their ability to stay detached, but for their willingness to be seen. It's not a quick fix. It's a gradual, often invisible shift. But it's real. In those moments of connection, the avoidant person starts to realize that vulnerability doesn't have to mean danger. That opening up doesn't have to end in rejection. That being close to someone doesn't mean losing themselves. And that realization is what allows the armor to crack. The walls begin to lower. The grip on control begins to loosen. Because now, connection has shown them a different kind of safety, one that doesn't depend on distance and detachment, but on trust and presence. So if you're with someone who seems avoidant, remember this: their control is not a rejection of you, it's a protection of themselves. And the key isn't to challenge that control head on, but to offer them something stronger, real connection. Show them they can be safe without having to control every interaction. Show them they can be loved without having to keep you at arm's length. When you do that, you're not breaking down walls. You're offering them a way out of the armor they thought they needed. And in that space, real connection can finally begin to grow. There's a pattern that plays out time and time again in relationships with avoidant personalities. It's a dance of pursuit and withdrawal, where one person leans in, reaching for closeness, connection, understanding, while the other pulls away, retreating into silence or distance. It can feel like a cruel game, one that leaves the pursuer exhausted and confused. But what if the very act of chasing is what keeps the dance going? What if the moment you stop chasing, they stop running? You see, avoidant individuals are not trying to frustrate or confuse you. Their instinct to withdraw isn't about you. It's about the fear that intimacy and vulnerability trigger in them. When they sense that someone is pushing to get closer, their survival instincts tell them to pull back. It's not a conscious choice, it's an automatic response. The more someone chases, the faster they retreat. The more someone demands closeness, the more suffocated they feel. It's not rejection, it's self-preservation. And here's the paradox: the harder you try to bridge the distance, the more distance they create. The more you pursue, the more they feel the need to escape. This is where many people get stuck, believing that if they just love harder, communicate more, or prove their devotion, they'll finally break through the walls. But the truth is, this approach only strengthens the avoidance defenses. It confirms their belief that closeness equals loss of control, that love comes with demands they can't meet. But the moment you stop chasing, when you step back and create space, you change the dynamic completely. You signal that you're not trying to force connection, not trying to control or manipulate the relationship. Instead, you're respecting their boundaries. You're giving them the room to breathe, to feel, to reflect. And in that space, something remarkable happens. They stop running because there's no longer a need to. When you stop chasing, you stop activating their fears. You create a sense of safety they haven't felt before. They realize they're not being cornered or pressured. And with that realization comes a subtle shift. They begin to feel less threatened by closeness. They start to consider the possibility of connection on their terms. They may even begin to take small steps toward you, steps they would never take if they felt you were pursuing them relentlessly. This isn't about playing games or using reverse psychology. It's about understanding the avoidance inner world and responding with empathy instead of urgency. It's about trusting that real connection can't be forced. It has to be invited. When you stop chasing, you create an invitation, not an ultimatum. You show them that you're willing to meet them where they are without pressure or expectation. And that's what makes them feel safe enough to come closer. It's important to remember that stopping the chase doesn't mean giving up on the relationship. It means shifting your focus from pursuit to presence. Instead of trying to convince them to let you in, focus on being steady, calm, and grounded. Show them through your actions that you're here, that you respect their pace, and that you're not going to disappear the moment they pull back. This consistency is what builds trust, the foundation of any real connection. And when they begin to see that you're not chasing, not pushing, not demanding, they stop running. Not immediately and not dramatically, but gradually and quietly. They start to feel a different kind of safety, one where connection is a choice, not a threat. They realize they can step closer without losing themselves, without fear of being overwhelmed or engulfed. So if you're stuck in the cycle of chasing and withdrawing, take a breath, step back, create space. Trust the process. Because the moment you stop chasing, you give them permission to stop running. And in that space, a real, lasting connection has a chance to grow. Not because you forced it, but because you invited it. When we look at someone with an avoidant personality, it's easy to focus on their distance. We notice how they pull away, how they seem reluctant to open up, how they avoid deep conversations or emotional closeness. It's natural to interpret these behaviors as rejection, as if they don't care or don't want connection. But what if we've been looking at it all wrong? What if these behaviors aren't about a lack of desire for connection, but about a deep need for safety? Avoidants are not people who don't want love. They are people who have learned, often through painful experiences, that love feels unsafe. That connection brings with it the risk of hurt, disappointment, or being overwhelmed. Somewhere along the way, they internalize the message that vulnerability equals danger. So, they protect themselves. They create distance, not because they don't value closeness, but because they fear what it might cost them. When you start to see their behavior not as rejection, but as self-protection, everything shifts. The moment you understand this need for safety, you stop trying to force connection. You stop taking their distance personally. Instead, you start to think, how can I create an environment where this person feels safe enough to lean in? And that changes the entire dynamic. Because now, you're no longer operating from frustration or resentment. You're operating from empathy. You realize that the walls aren't meant to shut you out. They're meant to keep them safe. Creating safety doesn't mean tolerating unhealthy behavior or sacrificing your own needs. It means showing up consistently, calmly, and without judgment. It means letting them know through your actions that you are a safe space. Not a perfect space, not an endlessly accommodating space, but a steady one. One where they don't have to fear being overwhelmed or suffocated. One where they can take their time, test the waters, and learn, bit by bit, that connection can be safe. This approach requires patience. It requires you to let go of the timeline you might have in your head. You can't rush safety. You can't force trust. But you can cultivate it. You can show them, moment by moment, that you are trustworthy, that you respect their boundaries, that you see them for who they are and not for who you want them to be. And this isn't about grand gestures or dramatic words. It's about small, consistent actions, showing up when you say you will, listening without interrupting, responding calmly when they pull back. What happens when you do this? Their defenses begin to soften, not because you've pushed them to change, but because you've shown them that it's safe to do so. They begin to experience connection not as something dangerous or demanding, but as something comforting and supportive. And as they begin to feel safe, they begin to open up. They share more. They trust more. They lean in more. All because you changed the game from trying to get connection to creating a space where connection feels possible. This shift doesn't just transform your relationship with an avoidant, it transforms you. You become more grounded, more patient, more attuned to the deeper needs beneath the surface behaviors. You stop seeing distance as a rejection of you and start seeing it as a reflection of their fear. And instead of reacting with frustration, you respond with understanding. You meet their fear with compassion. You meet their distance with steadiness. And in doing so, you build a bridge that invites them at their own pace to cross over. Understanding their need for safety isn't about excusing hurtful behaviors or accepting less than you deserve. It's about recognizing that connection isn't built through force. It's built through trust. And trust grows when people feel safe. The moment you understand that, you stop trying to break down walls and start focusing on building safety. And in that safety, true connection can finally take root. In a world that rewards instant results and quick fixes, The idea of patience and consistency might seem counterintuitive. We're taught to push, to strive, to make things happen. But when it comes to relationships with avoidant personalities, that approach often backfires. Why? Because the need for control and distance that avoidants carry isn't something you can force your way through. It's something that only patience and consistency can gently, gradually, and powerfully dissolve. It's easy to feel frustrated when someone pulls away, when they seem distant or disconnected. Our instinct is to react, to push harder, to demand answers, to insist on change. But the more we push, the more their defenses go up. Avoidants don't respond to force, they respond to safety. And safety is built not through pressure, but through patience. It's built through showing up again and again in a steady, predictable way that says, I'm here and I'm not going to leave when things get tough. This doesn't mean tolerating bad behavior or giving up your own needs. It means setting clear boundaries for yourself while also showing that you're consistent and trustworthy. It means being the calm in the storm, the steady presence that doesn't waver in the face of their fears. And that's where true power lies. It's not in trying to control them or the relationship. It's in controlling your own reactions, your own expectations, your own energy. Patience is powerful because it allows space for the avoidant person to breathe. It gives them the time they need to feel safe, to test the waters of vulnerability. To see that connection doesn't have to mean chaos or suffocation. When you approach with patience, you're not rushing them to be different or expecting instant change. You're allowing them to move at their own pace, knowing that real transformation is slow and steady. And consistency is equally powerful. It's what builds trust, especially with someone who has learned that people can be unpredictable, unreliable, or overwhelming. When you're consistent, when your words match your actions, when your presence is steady, when your reactions are calm, you create a foundation of reliability. The avoidant person begins to see that you're not like others who might have let them down. They start to believe, even if just a little, that it's safe to let their guard down. Consistency isn't about perfection. It's about showing up day after day in small ways that matter. It's about listening when they speak, even when they're saying very little. It's about respecting their boundaries, even when it's hard. It's about being there when they need you, not just when it's convenient. These quiet, steady actions are what build the bridge of trust and safety over time. And here's the paradox: when you stop trying to force change and instead focus on patience and consistency, change often happens naturally. The avoidant person begins to feel safe enough to open up, to connect, to share. Not because you demanded it, but because you created the conditions for it to happen. They start to lean in, not because you chased them, but because they trust you enough to stop running. True power in relationships, especially with avoidant personalities, doesn't come from control or urgency. It comes from the quiet strength of patience and the unwavering presence of consistency. It comes from knowing that love is not about fixing or forcing. It's about creating a space where someone can feel safe enough to grow at their own pace. It's about trusting the process even when it's slow. And it's about realizing that the most profound changes often happen not in moments of intensity, but in the steady, patient rhythm of showing up day after day. When you embrace this truth, you become a powerful force of stability and compassion. You stop chasing connection and start creating it. And in that space of patience and consistency, the avoidant person has the chance to experience a kind of love they never thought possible. One that doesn't demand but invites. One that doesn't rush but endures. And that is where real, lasting connection is born.